The morning started like any other at the old school building, where the air always smelled a bit like chalk and warm paper. The students were settling into their seats after break, laughing and talking loudly as they waited for the teachers to begin the weekly music activity. It was supposed to be a fun part of the day, a chance for everyone to relax. But not everyone felt that way. One student in particular sat quietly at the back, hoping no one would draw attention to her. She was a small girl with gentle eyes and a habit of keeping her hands folded on her desk. She never caused trouble and hardly ever spoke unless someone asked her a direct question. Most days she wished she could disappear into the background completely. She didn't like being noticed, not by the teachers and definitely not by the students who loved to point out anything that made someone different. When the music teacher entered the room carrying a box of rhythm sticks and a stack of sheet papers, the noise level went up as excitement spread through the class. Everyone knew that music day meant someone would have to perform something in front of the room. Most students enjoyed showing off a little, tapping out beats or singing their favorite songs. But today, the teacher had something else in mind. Today, he said with an extra bright smile, "We're going to start by letting a few students try the piano. It's important to explore new talents." His voice had that cheerful tone teachers use when they want the students to cooperate without complaining. Some of the students clapped, others groaned, but almost everyone turned toward the piano sitting in the corner of the room. It wasn't a fancy piano, just an old upright with a few scratches on the side and keys that had turned yellow over the years. Still, when someone played it, the sound filled the whole room. The teacher scanned the class the way someone might scan a menu, trying to decide what to pick first. Then, his eyes landed on the quiet girl in the back. "You," he said, pointing in her direction. "Why don't you give it a try today?" A few students twisted in their seats to look at her. Some had already started whispering. Her heart thumped so loudly in her chest that she wondered if others could hear it. She tried to smile politely, but inside she felt a wave of nervous heat rise through her. "Oh, sir, maybe someone else should go first," she said in a soft voice. "I don't think I'm ready." But the teacher chuckled lightly, waving off her hesitation. "Nonsense. This is just for fun. Don't worry, nobody expects perfection." There was something about the way he said it friendly on the surface, but with a hint of amusement underneath. A few of the teachers from other classes were standing near the doorway, watching, and even they exchanged small grins as if they were already predicting she would struggle. The girl stood slowly, feeling dozens of eyes following her every step as she moved toward the piano. Her hands felt cold, but her cheeks were warm. She wished she had some way to disappear, to run back to her seat, but she forced herself to keep moving. She didn't want to make a scene. The sooner she got this over with, the sooner she could sit down again. Behind her, a few students giggled softly, not loud enough for the teachers to scold them, but loud enough for her to hear. They weren't being cruel, at least not in a way teachers would notice. They were simply amused, convinced that quiet kids never had anything impressive to show. When she reached the piano bench, she sat down carefully, smoothing her skirt with her trembling hands. She looked at the keys, pretending to examine them like she had never seen a piano before. She didn't want them to think she was confident. She didn't want them to expect anything from her at all. The teachers near the doorway continued watching, arms crossed and faint smiles on their faces. They seemed relaxed, almost entertained, as if they were waiting for something awkward to happen. The music teacher encouraged her again, saying, "Just try one note, or a few. Anything is fine. We're all here to support you." But the tone of the room told her something else. It was the tone of an audience expecting someone to trip, not physically, but socially. She could feel that strange energy gathering behind her, the kind that comes right before laughter. She sensed it like cold wind. Even so, she took a small breath, trying to steady her hands. Her fingers hovered above the keys. The smooth, cool surface felt familiar, comforting. Her heart still pounded, but something inside her shifted slightly. She wasn't sure if it was courage or just acceptance that she had no choice but to play something. She remembered practicing at home late at night on the old keyboard someone had given her family. It didn't even work properly half the time. Some keys stuck, others made strange noises. But she practiced anyway. She practiced because she loved the feeling of getting lost in the music, even if no one ever heard it. But this was very different. This wasn't her room. This wasn't her quiet space. This wasn't her dim lamp with soft air and time to herself. This was a bright, crowded classroom filled with people waiting to see whether she would embarrass herself. She placed her fingers lightly on one of the middle keys. Her breath paused. The class had fallen silent, not respectful silent, but curious silent. It was the kind of quiet that made her skin itch. She could practically feel the teacher's eyes on her back. Her hand shook slightly as she adjusted her position. She still didn't know what she would play, or even how much she should play. She didn't want to show too much. She didn't want to show too little. She just wanted to get this moment over with. The teacher spoke again, trying to sound warm. Take your time. But she knew they weren't expecting anything remarkable. In fact, the small curve in their lips suggested they were ready to laugh kindly and move on. They thought she would tap a few wrong notes, blush, and return to her seat. They thought she would fit the picture they had of her, a shy kid with no voice. Her heart squeezed at the thought. She didn't want to prove anything to them. She didn't want to impress anyone. She just didn't want to be the joke of the day. With a slow breath, she pressed down on the key. A single, clear note filled the room. She froze. The sound rang longer than she expected, echoing off the wooden walls. Something about it felt different, like the room itself had shifted. The note was simple, just one, but it carried a strange confidence that she hadn't meant to reveal. For a split second, she sensed the teacher stiffen in surprise. Their amused grins faltered. The students leaned forward a little, unaware of how their expressions had changed. She didn't lift her finger right away. She let the sound fade naturally, slowly, until the room felt still again. It was only one note, but it carried a message none of them had anticipated. And in that moment, without meaning to, she realized something quietly powerful. These people, who thought they already knew everything about her, didn't know her at all. She stared at the keys, unsure of what to do next. Should she continue? Should she stop? The room was waiting, no longer amused, no longer whispering. Something had shifted in their expectations, whether she continued or not. One thing was already clear: the teachers were no longer grinning. The room was still strangely quiet after that single note, as if the sound had settled into the air and refused to leave. The girl kept her eyes on the keys, unsure of what she had just done. She hadn't meant to play it with such confidence. She hadn't meant to draw any attention at all. But there was no taking it back now. She could feel the energy behind her changing. It wasn't the same amused, relaxed feeling from before. Now it felt heavier, like the room was waiting for something without knowing what it was waiting for. The teachers, who had been smiling seconds earlier, stood straighter. Their expressions softened into something more focused. She slowly pulled her hand back from the key and rested it on her lap for a moment. Her fingers tingled slightly, as if the sound was still running through them. She didn't know if she should play another note. She didn't know if she even wanted to. But she could sense that everyone was watching her differently now. At the back of the room, a boy whispered something, but it wasn't the same kind of whisper as before. It wasn't teasing. It was more like he was confused, maybe even impressed. The girl didn't turn around to check. She kept her attention on the keys, feeling the tension in her shoulders slowly fade. The music teacher cleared his throat softly. That was nice. You can continue if you want. His voice had lost the playful tone. It sounded more careful now, almost respectful. She didn't respond. She didn't trust her voice yet. Instead, she placed her fingers gently on the keyboard again. Her hand still shook a little, but not as much as before. She knew one note had been enough to get their attention, but she wasn't sure if she wanted to do more. She remembered the nights at home when she practiced quietly, trying not to wake anyone. She remembered the broken keyboard with missing buttons that sometimes sparked when plugged in. She remembered trying to copy songs by ear because she didn't know how to read music. Every memory floated through her mind like pieces of a puzzle. She closed her eyes. She took in a soft breath, and then she played a second note. It was simple, soft, but it connected so naturally with the first one that a small wave of sound rippled through the classroom. She didn't mean to make it flow so smoothly. It just happened, the same way water finds its path without thinking. A few students leaned forward in their chairs. Someone shifted quietly, but no one laughed. No one whispered anymore. Her fingers slid to the next key almost without her permission. She didn't know what she was going to play. She didn't plan anything. She just followed the feeling in her hands. The same feeling she had late at night when the world was quiet and she was alone with her music. The short melody she formed was uncertain at first, but then it grew. It grew just enough for the class to understand that she wasn't pressing random keys. She knew where her fingers were going. She knew how to make the notes connect. She opened her eyes slightly and looked at the keyboard, letting her hands move with gentle confidence. She didn't rush. She didn't try to impress anyone. She simply played the way she always played, soft, honest, and with a kind of emotion that didn't need big movements. As she continued, the teachers exchanged glances. Their eyebrows lifted just enough to show surprise. One teacher near the doorway uncrossed his arms, stepping a little closer as if he wanted to hear better. Meanwhile, the students who had whispered earlier stayed completely silent. Some looked confused, as if they were trying to understand how someone so quiet could sound so sure. Others looked almost embarrassed for having judged her before she even touched the keys. The girl didn't notice any of this. She was somewhere else now, somewhere only she knew. Her world was no longer the classroom. It was the world she always escaped to when she played at night. It was soft, calm, far away from the noise and pressure of school. Her fingers traced a gentle pattern on the keyboard, something she had practiced over and over at home, though it had never sounded quite this smooth on her old keyboard. Here, on the real piano, the notes blended beautifully. They filled the room with warmth. She could feel her heartbeat slowing down. It wasn't racing from fear anymore. Now it matched the rhythm of the quiet melody she played. She let the music guide her, letting each note choose the next one. The music teacher stepped a bit closer, not wanting to interrupt, but clearly surprised. His eyes softened, losing the earlier amusement. He looked at her differently now, more like someone discovering something unexpected. After a small rise in the melody, she let her hands come to a gentle stop. She didn't end with a dramatic finish. She simply lifted her fingers softly, letting the last note linger in the air. The room stayed silent for a moment. It wasn't empty silence this time. It was thoughtful, almost emotional, like people were trying to understand what they just heard. She hesitated before moving her hands away completely. She didn't know what to do next. She didn't know what the teachers expected now. She had only meant to play a few notes, maybe enough to get through the moment. But she had done more than that without planning to. She turned her head slightly, just enough to glance at the class. The expressions she found surprised her. No one was laughing. No one was smirking. No one was whispering behind hands. Most students looked wide-eyed. A few looked down, almost ashamed. Others looked like they didn't know how to react at all. The music teacher finally found his voice. "That was very good," he said quietly. "Very good." His voice wasn't loud or excited. It was calm, thoughtful, almost humbled. She looked down again, unsure of how to respond. Compliments always made her uncomfortable. She didn't like being the center of attention. She didn't like people staring at her. She definitely didn't like the idea that teachers now saw her differently. "Do you want to play a little more?" the teacher asked gently. She shook her head quickly. Her heart started racing again, not from fear of playing but from fear of being watched. She felt like she had already shared too much of herself. "No, thank you," she whispered. The teacher nodded, not pushing her. "All right. You may go back to your seat." She stood slowly, her legs feeling lighter than before. As she walked back to her desk, she didn't hear any jokes or giggles. The room stayed quiet, following her with a kind of respect she had never felt before in school. When she sat down, she folded her hands in her lap again. Her heart still beat fast, but not from fear this time. It was something else, something she couldn't explain yet, something that felt like relief and pride mixed with confusion. The teachers continued to look at her, whispering to each other softly. The students kept glancing her way, trying not to stare too obviously. She didn't know what to do with all the attention. She wished things could go back to normal, but she could tell something had changed. For the rest of the class, the teachers chose other students to try the piano, but the energy wasn't the same. Every time someone played a random tune or tapped the keys without rhythm, the class couldn't help comparing it to what she had done even if none of them said it out loud. And as she sat quietly at her desk, she realized something she had never allowed herself to believe before. Maybe the music she played alone at home mattered more than she thought. Maybe it meant something. Maybe she meant something. She looked at her hands. They looked the same as always, small, neat, a little shaky. But now she saw them differently. They weren't just hands that worked quietly in the background. They were hands that held something powerful, something she had kept hidden, something she wasn't sure she wanted anyone to see, but now they had, and the world around her had shifted because of it. The class continued, but she barely heard the teacher's instructions. Her mind stayed with the piano, with the sound of the keys, with the way the room had changed when she played. She didn't know what would happen next, but deep inside, something warm flickered, something that felt like the beginning of a story she had never expected to tell. The rest of the school day felt slow and strange. Even after the music class ended, the girl could feel the eyes of her classmates on her. They didn't stare in a rude way, but in a way that made her feel like a mystery they had never noticed before. She tried to ignore it, keeping her head down as she packed her books and walked to her next class. But the feeling followed her everywhere. When the final bell rang and students rushed out into the hallway, she moved quietly through the crowd. Normally nobody paid attention to her, but today she caught little glances from different directions. Some students whispered to each other. Others simply watched her walk past as if trying to understand who she really was. She didn't smile. She didn't react. She just kept walking outside the school gate. She waited for the traffic to clear before crossing the road. The afternoon sun warmed her face, and she breathed in deeply. Here, away from the crowded classroom, she felt more like herself again. No eyes following her. No teachers giving her curious looks. Just the quiet street, a few passing cars, and the distant noises of the city. Her walk home took about 20 minutes. She passed a small bakery that always smelled like fresh bread. She passed a street vendor who sold toys, canes, and small colorful objects that always caught her eye even though she rarely stopped to look. She passed a tiny park where younger kids played on swings. Everything felt familiar. Everything felt normal. But inside her, things were not normal at all. As she walked, she replayed the moment at the piano again and again in her head. She remembered the first note that filled the room, the way the teacher stopped smiling, the way the students leaned forward silently. She remembered how her hands seemed to move on their own, as if the piano was calling her. None of it was planned. None of it was meant to happen. And yet it did. She reached her home, a small apartment building that always smelled of spices from the restaurant downstairs. She climbed the stairs to the second floor, unlocked the door quietly, and stepped inside. The apartment was humble but cozy. The walls were thin, the lights were soft, and the furniture was simple. On one side of the living room, near the window, sat the old keyboard, the one she had practiced on for years. It was scratched and faded, and a couple of the keys were taped down to keep them from sticking. But to her, it was still special. She placed her school bag on the sofa and walked straight toward the keyboard without thinking. She didn't turn it on. She just sat down and rested her hands on the top of it. This was where everything started. This was where she had learned to play in secret. This was where she had spent so many nights trying to turn her feelings into sound. Now, suddenly, other people knew she could play. They knew she wasn't the quiet shadow they thought she was. They knew she had something to say even if she didn't say it with words. She felt a mixture of emotions: pride, fear, confusion, hope. She didn't know what she was supposed to do now. She didn't know how to act the next day at school. She didn't know if people would expect something from her. She stood up again, unable to sit still. She walked to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and took a few slow sips. The coolness helped her think. Was she ready for people to see this side of her? She wasn't sure, but she did know one thing: she had always dreamed of playing for others, even if the dream felt too big for someone so quiet. As the afternoon turned into evening, her mother returned home from work, tired but smiling. She placed her bag on the table and hugged her daughter gently. "How was school today?" her mother asked. The girl hesitated for a moment. She opened her mouth to answer, closed it, then finally whispered, "It was different." Her mother laughed softly. Different how? She didn't know how to explain the day without sounding dramatic. She didn't know how to tell her mother that she had shocked her entire class with a single note and a simple melody. So she just said, "I played the piano in front of everyone." Her mother's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Oh, did they ask you to?" "Yes," the girl nodded. "I didn't want to at first, but they insisted." "And how did it go?" The girl looked down at her hands, then back at her mother. "They were surprised." Her mother smiled with soft understanding. "I'm not surprised. You've been practicing for a long time." The girl blushed slightly. "But I've never played in front of people before." "Not like that." Her mother reached out and gently touched her shoulder. "Sometimes the world doesn't see us until we show them who we are." The words settled in the girl's heart. She didn't expect such a simple sentence to feel so heavy. They ate dinner quietly. The girl kept thinking about her mother's words. She wondered if she had shown the world too much, or maybe not enough. Later that night, after finishing her homework, she turned on the old keyboard. It flickered a little, humming as it powered up. She placed her fingers on the keys and played the same soft melody she had played at school. But this time it felt different. This time she knew what people heard when she played. Her music wasn't just something she kept inside anymore. It had reached others now. It had touched them. Her mother watched from the doorway for a few moments, smiling quietly. She didn't interrupt. She didn't speak. She just listened. When the girl finished, she turned off the keyboard and let out a long breath. She felt lighter now, as if the music had carried away some of the worry sitting on her chest. Before going to bed, she stood by the window and looked out at the lights of the city. Small lights, big lights, some bright, some fading. She wondered if she would ever shine among them, or if she would always stay in the shadows. She didn't have the answer yet. The next morning, she woke up early. She dressed quietly, braided her hair, and ate breakfast with her mother. Before leaving the apartment, she paused near the keyboard again. Her fingers hovered above the keys for just a second before she pulled them back and headed out. The walk to school felt longer than usual. She wasn't used to people noticing her, and she didn't know what kind of day awaited her. She walked slowly, trying to breathe normally, but her stomach felt tight. Once she reached the school gate, she stepped inside and heard whispers right away. Not bad whispers, not mocking ones, but curious ones. There she is. That's the girl who played yesterday. She's actually really good. She kept walking, eyes down, but her heart thumped at every passing comment. When she entered the classroom, several heads turned. Some of her classmates smiled gently. Others simply looked at her with quiet respect, unsure of how to approach her now. The girl slipped into her seat and tried to calm her breathing. A moment later, the music teacher entered. He glanced around the room, then his eyes rested on her. Not in a heavy way, not in a way that made her feel pressured, but in a thoughtful way. Before we start today, he said to the class, I want to say something. The students quieted down. Yesterday, we saw something special. We saw someone show a part of themselves we didn't know about. That takes courage. The girl felt heat rise to her face. She lowered her head. The teacher continued, sometimes the quietest people carry the brightest things inside them, and we shouldn't judge anyone based on how they appear from the outside. The class nodded. A few students glanced toward the girl again, but this time with kindness. The teacher set down his books. Now, let's begin. And remember, music belongs to everyone. The girl sat still, feeling a warm glow inside her chest. She didn't want attention, but she did want to be understood. And for the first time in a long time, she felt seen. As the lesson continued, she let her thoughts drift back to the piano in the corner of the classroom. She wasn't sure if she would play again anytime soon, but she knew the piano would always be waiting, and something deep inside her whispered that she wasn't done yet, not even close. The hall felt strangely warm when the teenager stepped back after finishing her last note. Even though the audience was still buzzing from the surprise of her performance, she stood there quietly, almost unsure of what to do next. The lights above her glowed softly, making her look even younger than she already was. For a moment, she just stared at the piano, the same instrument that had caused her so much fear earlier, and now felt like the only thing that understood her. People in the audience whispered to each other, trying to make sense of what they had just witnessed. Some looked embarrassed for laughing at her in the beginning. Others looked amazed, unable to believe that someone who entered the stage so nervously could play with such strength and emotion. But she didn't pay attention to them. She was still trying to calm her heart, which felt like it was running a marathon inside her chest. The renowned maestro who had earlier embarrassed her stood frozen. His face had lost all its confidence and sharpness. He had expected her to fail. He had expected the crowd to laugh. He had expected her to prove him right. But instead, she had performed the same piece he once failed publicly, and she played it so beautifully that even he couldn't deny it. His hands trembled slightly, though he tried to hide it. No matter how hard he tried to keep a serious expression, everyone could see the shock on his face. A few people turned their eyes toward him, waiting for his reaction. But the girl didn't look at him at all. She simply lifted her bag from the floor and held it close to her chest. She wasn't angry. She wasn't trying to show off. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She had only wanted a chance to play. And that was what she did. The host of the show suddenly walked toward her, smiling widely. His voice echoed through the microphone, cheerful and full of excitement. That was unbelievable. He said loudly, "Would you look at this? A performance like that from someone we least expected." The crowd cheered in agreement. The girl swallowed and took a small step back. The attention made her feel overwhelmed. She wasn't used to it. She looked around, searching for a way to leave quietly. She never liked being in the spotlight. For her, playing the piano was something personal, a safe space where she could express everything she couldn't say out loud. Before she could move, A few audience members rushed toward the stage. They weren't loud, but their expressions were full of kindness and admiration. One older woman wiped her eyes, still emotional from the music. "My child, that was beautiful." The woman whispered, "You have a gift. Don't ever hide it." Her words made the girl's chest tighten. She nodded softly, feeling a mix of gratitude and discomfort. She had never wanted to hide her talent. She simply never had anyone who believed in it. Meanwhile, the maestro remained motionless. The lights reflected off his glasses, and for the first time in a long while, he felt something he rarely allowed himself to feel: shame. He had spent years protecting his reputation, years pretending he was flawless, years rejecting anyone who reminded him of his own failures. And now, a quiet teenager with unsure steps had played the same piece he once stumbled on. She didn't just play it. She brought out emotions in it he had never been able to touch. The host noticed the silence around the maestro and decided to break it. "Sir," he called out gently, "would you like to share a few words?" The maestro slowly lifted his head. The audience waited, not knowing if he would make an excuse, criticize the girl, or ignore what happened entirely. But the girl didn't look at him. She didn't want his approval. She didn't expect anything from him. Finally, he stood up. His movements were stiff, as if he wanted to walk away, but his pride wouldn't let him. He adjusted his jacket, cleared his throat, and faced the crowd. He began, but his voice cracked slightly. He paused, took a breath, started again. "I did not expect that." That was all he managed to say. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't praise. It wasn't acceptance. It was a simple truth, and maybe the only truth he could handle admitting. The host looked disappointed, but the audience understood enough. They didn't need him to say more. His expression had already revealed everything. The girl stepped down from the stage slowly, holding the railing as if unsure where to go. She walked through the narrow hallway behind the curtains, trying to escape the noise of clapping and talking still echoing from the hall. Her steps felt heavy now, not because she was tired, but because the moment she had waited for was suddenly over. Backstage was quiet. A soft humming sound from the lights filled the silence. The girl sat on a wooden bench, letting her bag fall beside her. She took a deep breath, then another. She wasn't sure if she should feel relieved or confused. Everything had happened so fast that she remembered how the maestro had pointed at her earlier, telling her she wasn't ready, telling her she didn't know the piece well enough, telling her she would embarrass herself. She remembered how her hands shook when she touched the piano keys for the first time on stage. But then she remembered how, once she started playing, everything else disappeared. She thought she would cry after it was all over, but she didn't. Instead, she felt grounded, still, like she had finally stepped into a place she belonged. A moment later, the backstage door opened, and the host walked in. His expression softened when he saw her sitting quietly. "There you are," he said gently. "Are you okay?" She nodded. "I'm fine. You did something incredible out there," he told her. "You know that, right?" She hesitated before answering. "I just wanted to play, and you did," he said. "Better than anyone expected." She gave him a small smile. It wasn't a proud smile, it was simply honest. The host sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "People are asking about you. They want to know your story. They want to know how you learned to play like that. They want to know everything." She shook her head quickly. "I don't want attention. I only wanted a chance." "Then we'll keep it simple," he promised. "No pressure, no forcing you into anything. But you should know something: your performance touched people. Really touched them. Not in a dramatic way, not in a showy way, in a real way." His words lingered in the air. She didn't respond, but she heard him outside. The crowd was still cheering lightly. People were discussing her performance as if they had discovered something rare. And maybe they had. Back inside the hall, the maestro sat quietly in his chair, staring at the stage where she had stood. For the first time, he looked small. Not because he lacked importance, but because he realized he had let his pride overshadow something beautiful. But the girl did not think about him anymore. She was sitting calmly backstage, her fingers gently tapping her knees in a soft rhythm, almost like she was already hearing another melody forming in her mind. Her journey wasn't finished, not even close. This moment was only one step in the long path ahead of her. And without knowing it, she had changed more than just the mood in a room. She had changed the hearts of everyone who heard her play. The teenager sat backstage for a long moment, listening to the soft echoes of voices still drifting through the hallway. The applause had faded, but the energy of the night still lingered in the air like warm dust floating in sunlight. She wasn't sure how to feel. Everything had happened so quickly that she hadn't fully processed any of it. All she knew was that she had truly played from her heart, and people had listened. She lifted her bag and held it against her chest. She liked the quiet here. It felt safe. Away from the eyes, away from the noise, away from the pressure. Even though her fingers still tingled from the performance, she didn't regret stepping onto the stage. She had taken a risk, and somehow, it had turned into something bigger than she expected. After several minutes, the door opened again. This time, one of the assistants poked his head inside and said gently, "They're still asking for you. No rush. But whenever you're ready." She nodded politely. She didn't want to be rude, but she also wasn't ready to go out there again. The assistant smiled understandingly and closed the door. She took another slow breath. She remembered the look on the maestro's face, the shock, the confusion, the discomfort. She hadn't played to hurt him. She hadn't played to embarrass him. She had played because she needed to show that she belonged, even if nobody believed her at first. As she sat there thinking, the host entered again. He carried 2 small cups of warm tea and held one out to her. "You look like you need this," he said kindly. She accepted it with both hands, feeling the warmth seep into her palms. "May I sit?" he asked. She nodded, and he sat beside her, careful not to crowd her. "You know," he said with a gentle smile, "not everyone gets a moment like this, a moment where the whole room stops and listens. You did that tonight." She stared at the tea. "It doesn't feel real." "I understand," he replied, "but it was real, and whether you wanted attention or not, people saw something in you." She let the words settle. They didn't feel heavy, they felt warm, like something she needed to hear. The host took a slow sip of his tea. "Do you want to know something interesting? That maestro, he's known for being strict, very strict. He doesn't believe in second chances. He doesn't encourage easily. Many young performers have walked away because of how he speaks." She looked up, listening quietly. "But you," the host continued, "you made him look at himself differently." Maybe for the first time in years she didn't answer. She didn't know what to say. A few moments passed before she spoke again. "I didn't want to upset him." "I know," he said. "Sometimes truth has its own way of appearing. You didn't try to show him up. You just played honestly. And sometimes, honesty is louder than pride." The teenager lowered her eyes. She still didn't feel angry at the maestro. She didn't feel victorious either. She just felt grateful. Grateful she didn't let fear stop her. After a while, she finally stood up. "I think I'm ready to go." The host smiled and walked with her toward the hallway. As they approached the stage area, the soft murmurs grew clearer. People were still waiting, not in a loud or impatient way, but in a hopeful one. They wanted to see her one last time. When she stepped out from behind the curtain, the room quieted instantly. Then a gentle wave of applause began, polite, warm, honest. Not wild, not overwhelming, just enough to let her know they truly appreciated her. She stood at the edge of the stage, unsure of what to do. She didn't want to make a speech. She didn't want to be dramatic. She simply bowed her head slightly, thanking them. A voice rose from the audience. "Can we hear you again sometime?" Another person chimed in. "You made us feel something today." She smiled softly. "Thank you," she said in a quiet voice that somehow carried across the room. She wasn't planning to promise anything. She didn't know where life would take her, but she knew she would keep playing. Not for fame, not for recognition, for her self-doubt. As she stepped away from the stage, she noticed the maestro standing near a side exit, his arms crossed tightly. He wasn't glaring. He wasn't smirking. He looked conflicted. For a moment, they locked eyes. He opened his mouth slightly, as if trying to speak, but no words came out. The teenager didn't wait for him to find them. She gave him a polite, calm nod, nothing more, and walked past. He watched her leave, a strange expression on his face. Maybe regret, maybe respect, maybe both. Outside the building, the night air felt cool and refreshing. The stars were scattered across the sky, and a light breeze brushed her hair back gently. She walked down the steps slowly, feeling the weight of the evening ease off her shoulders. The world felt quiet again, comfortably quiet. The host followed her outside, stopping at the top of the steps. "Do you need a ride home?" he asked. She shook her head. "I'll be fine. I live close." "All right," he said. "Walk safely. And remember, this doesn't have to be the end of your journey. It can be the beginning." She nodded. "Thank you for giving me a chance." "You gave yourself that chance," he replied with a smile. She turned and began walking down the street. The sound of her footsteps echoed softly on the pavement. Each step felt lighter than the last dot as she passed the quiet shops and dimly lit windows. She thought about the piano. She thought about how playing felt like breathing, natural, necessary, honest. She wanted to keep learning, keep growing, keep discovering new pieces that stirred something inside her. She didn't need fame. She didn't need applause. She just needed music. And somehow, deep inside, she knew music needed her too. When she reached her small apartment building, she paused at the entrance. The night had been long, but unforgettable. She placed her hand on the door handle and let out a soft sigh, part tired, part relieved, part proud. The moment she stepped inside, she already felt the familiar comfort of home wrap around her. She placed her bag down, sat near her small keyboard, and gently pressed one key. A soft note filled the quiet room. She smiled, not because of the audience, not because of the maestro, not because of the applause, but because she knew she was finally becoming the person she always wanted to be, the person music had been shaping her into. For years she played a small melody, just for herself. No pressure, no eyes watching, no doubts. Each note rose softly, filling the room with warmth. She didn't know what the future would bring. She didn't know whether people would remember her performance or the way she made them feel. But she knew one thing for certain: she would keep playing. And that was enough. Outside, the world moved on. But inside her small room, a new chapter had already begun, a quiet one, but powerful. The kind of chapter that grows slowly, but shapes everything that comes after. And as she played, her music carried a message she never needed to say aloud. Sometimes, the world underestimates you. Sometimes, voices try to silence you. Sometimes, people expect you to fail. But when you finally let your truth speak, it can silence every doubt. One note is enough. It always has been.